I just want to say very few words to welcome Jonathan Haidt, a psychology professor at the University of Virginia and a researcher of really extraordinary vision. The subject that he has revivified is moral psychology, and in particular, moral emotion, the study of moral sentiments. I think the last time that subject got its due was during the Enlightenment, but where Adam Smith was content merely to conjecture, John Haidt tackles the subject with real experimental rigor. He is truly a trendsetter in the best sense of that term, and if you want to see where the human sciences, where the study of human nature is going to be in 2012, you can't do better than to look at what John is doing now. So, John?
Thank you, Henry, for starting me off with embarrassment and fear of not living up to that introduction, but I'll do my best. To make this talk work, I actually have to know a little bit about your morality, so let me start by asking, are you liberal, centrist, or conservative? Please raise your hand right now if you would describe yourself as conservative or right of center. 1, 2, 3. Please raise your hand if you would describe yourself as right in the middle, neither liberal nor conservative. Okay, more. And as we all know, the third option is please raise your hand if you would describe yourself as liberal or left of center. Okay. So I can pretend to be shocked that readers of the New Yorker tend to be political liberals. Shocked. My message to you today is to enjoy the schadenfreude. It is a lot of fun to watch the chickens come home to roost. It reaffirms our belief in karma. But the second part of my message is to beware, because your partisan feelings blind you to moral and political reality. Now, I study morality, as Henry said, and here's a definition that's widely used in the psychological literature from the Berkeley psychologist Elliot Turiel. Morality is prescriptive judgments of justice, rights, and welfare pertaining to how people ought to relate to each other. When we look at these terms and we think, well, why do our minds care about these things? What's the psychological foundation of this moral sense? There are two obvious candidates. There's an enormous amount of research on the attachment system, on how we are evolved as mammals to be really sensitive to the care, to the needs of young, vulnerable creatures. And so we have a lot of programming up in our heads that make us really sensitive about harm and care. Also, we have a long history of reciprocal altruism. We evolved in an evolutionary dynamic that fitted us for making partnerships and alliances. It made us very sensitive to signs of cheating or dishonesty. And so we have all this really specialized software, you might say, that make us sensitive to issues of fairness and justice, and along with that comes ideas of rights. When we think about paragons of virtue, we think about who are the great moral figures, they are almost always exemplars of extraordinary care for those who are suffering, or of people who brought justice to the oppressed and who helped us increase equality. My research demonstrates, though, that this is just part of the moral domain. There's a lot more going on, but we liberals do not see it because we cosmopolitan, New Yorker, reading liberals live in a world that we might describe as Adam world. When we think about society, what is society? We cannot help but think of it as composed of individuals, and the point of morality is to regulate the social space so that these individuals can move around, pursue their whims and desires, and be protected as long as they don't hurt anyone. In Adam world, all you really need are these two principles. You can do what you want, just don't harm anyone. That's one foundation. And don't cheat anyone. People have to be honest. But most of the world doesn't live in Adam world. Most of the world doesn't see the world as just individuals. Most of the world could be described as living in what we might call lattice world. This is the world that we evolved in for thousands and thousands of years. I did some research in eastern India, and here I've just tried to animate, just to give a kind of an intuitive sense of how society might look as an alternative. This is what might happen when two families are joined by marriage. The extended families are much, much larger than this. But imagine that a daughter marries out of one family, and goes over to join another family, and then another girl marries into the first family. And then if the match was well made, this family on the right will move up in status. So there is movement. Things move around. But it's not just atoms moving around. If you think that groups and institutions and families and guilds and tribes and teams, if you think all these things exist, and they're not just the sum of the individuals, then morality is, in part, protecting the integrity of those units, of those groups. You then need more foundations. You need concerns about in-group loyalty, authority respect, and purity sanctity. So the point here is that moral regulation in Lattice World is a lot more than about protecting individuals directly. So if you want to understand conservatives, the central idea, I believe, I've been just doing a lot of reading about conservatives in the last few years, the central idea is that conservatives see value in structure. One of the foundational works of conservative thought, Edmund Burke, commenting on the extraordinary craziness and excesses of the French Revolution, said, "The restraints on men as well as their liberties are to be reckoned among their rights." 100 years later, the sociologist Emile Durkheim provided a supportive framework for this kind of perspective. Durkheim was a liberal. Durkheim himself was very much a liberal by temperament. But what he discovered in studying society and how it changed so amazingly in the 19th century was that people need order, structure, and constraint in order to flourish. Durkheim warned that too much freedom creates a state he called anomie, the French word for normlessness. Too much freedom breeds anomie, and in an anomic environment, people can't flourish. So even if all you care about is individuals, you might still think about, you might still value some kind of order and structure. Here's a more recent quote from the intellectual Irving Kristol. It's the father, not of Billy, but of the other guy who got us into the current mess. At any rate, this, I think, is a very eloquent defense of institutions when he wrote that institutions which have existed over a long period of time have a reason and purpose inherent in them. They have a kind of a collective wisdom. And we can't just go tinkering with social structures to suit the whim of the day. It takes a long time to build up social capital, social structure. And conservatives often are, as William Buckley said, standing athwart history yelling stop, or at least slow down. And this may not be a crazy message. Now, these are the key insights that helped me as a liberal, not just to understand conservative thought, but actually to appreciate that there might be something useful, important, and valuable for all of us in it. My research suggests that there are actually 5 foundations, 5 psychological systems. I told you about the first 2 already, the harm and the fairness, and then I mentioned the other 3. So the metaphor that I've developed to try to explain how evolution gave us minds that culture then fills in is to imagine that our minds contain, as it were, 5 flower pots, each with a specially prepared soil. And in each pot, certain kinds of virtues can grow, but only if cultures plant those seeds and then nurture them. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Every culture plants virtues in the harm and the fairness pot, and most do in the other ones as well. So here's the metaphor. Imagine virtues are cultivated, virtues grow. So because we all have the attachment system, we all have reciprocal altruism, we don't like it when people hurt others in general, and so we develop a moral vocabulary for talking about harm or for people who talking about people who protect others from harm. So we develop a language of virtues about kindness, also fairness, and the others. There are many virtues that can grow out of each of these pots. But we can't just teach any virtue we dream up. You can't just train kids to be anything you want. A learnable virtue must build on a pre-existing psychological foundation. I've collected data from a lot of different groups. Here's data from a very large internet study, about 1,700 people. We had 695 American respondents. And what this graph shows is we made up a questionnaire and we asked people, when you think about what's morally right or wrong, when you make moral judgments, how much are each of these features relevant? Things like whether somebody was hurt, whether somebody showed respect for traditions and authority. And so for each of the 5 foundations, there were 3 questions to measure endorsement of that foundation. And what you see is that the top 2 lines, the green line is for the fairness questions, the average of the fairness questions. The blue line is for the harm. Along the bottom edge, the x-axis, you see it's self-described politics, so people who describe themselves as very liberal are on the left. What you see is that for those people, the harm and fairness questions, that's what morality is all about. They give very high ratings to that. When I think about right and wrong, it's who's hurt and were people treated fairly and equally. That's what morality is. The others are not morality. But as people get more conservative, you'll notice, the blue and the green lines go down and the other 3 lines go up. so that when people describe themselves as very conservative, they actually value all 5 foundations equally. In this large study, we had enough data to look at, we had 477 people from the UK, so we were able to look just at their responses. We see the same pattern. People in Britain are a little bit more liberal, so there's a bit of a shift, but even still, you see the same converging pattern there. Now, once you look at things this way, this 2 foundation liberal versus 5 foundation conservative morality, I find, at least, that the battle lines in the culture war suddenly make sense. It didn't make sense. Why these particular issues? Why are these the issues that we fight about? But I hope to explain to you give you a way of looking at it that it makes sense of it. So, ground zero or issue 1 in the culture war is gay marriage. If you have a 2 foundation morality, it's obviously good to legalize gay marriage. It's a matter of compassion. It helps people who are discriminated against. It creates equality. There's no downside. You cannot understand someone who's opposed to it. You think anyone who is opposed to gay marriage must be like Fred Phelps, the guy up there who protests at all kinds of funerals and soldiers' funerals. His sign says, "Fags die, God laughs." Now, I think from what I've read about him, I think he might actually be schizophrenic. He might have some mental illness. But if you think that most Americans are like Fred Phelps, and that explains why every time a ballot initiative comes up to outlaw gay marriage, to protect marriage, why do those pass by large margins? Is it because everybody is schizophrenic or stupid? No. There has to be another reason. And what I'm trying to tell you is that the other reason is that there's a lot more to morality than liberals realize. So if you have a 5 foundation morality, you don't think of gay people as just people who happen to have a different sexual orientation. You probably imagine them as these flamboyant outsiders. They reject traditions, they reject traditional authority, and their very identity is defined by a sexual act, which if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you would feel is a perversion. So at least from a 5 foundation morality, I'm not saying that this is a morally correct view, but I hope you can at least understand why it's a controversial issue and why many people are opposed to legalizing gay marriage. When you look at it this way, this 2 versus 5 pattern, then I believe the electoral map of the United States should make a lot more sense. This is from the Kerry-Bush election. The blue counties are the ones that voted for Kerry. Of course, it's quite stunning how little space they take up, but of course it includes most of the cities. Now, what many people have pointed out is that the blue counties are mostly along the water. So you see the concentrations of blue in the northeast. They hug the Great Lakes. It goes along the west coast, but especially near the water on the west coast. And then you can see in the middle, you can actually see the Mississippi River going up from New Orleans all the way up into Minnesota. And I believe this shows that humidity is what makes people liberal. An alternative hypothesis is that when you have waterways, when you have rivers, when you have oceans, you have ports. And when you have ports, you have immigration, you have trade, you have diversity, you have mobility. When you have a diverse and mobile society, the moral domain pretty much has to shrink. You do your stuff, I'll do mine. I won't hurt you, you don't hurt me. But I'm not going to tell you how to dress or who to have sex with. But most of the world doesn't live that way. Most of the world lives in ways that are more traditional, more stable, and it's almost the default or normal human morality is this thicker 5 foundational morality. This is sort of the way morality goes unless you specifically shake things up and create these historically unusual conditions. So in this moral world, tolerance becomes the key virtue. And when tolerance gets carried to extremes, as I believe liberals often do, when it gets carried to extremes, then liberals become very vulnerable to attack in the culture war. I just Googled American family, or family, I think, and I just picked what seemed to me a prototypical American family with 2 daughters, and I'd like you to try to empathize with them for a moment. Put yourself in their place. Many of you have daughters or children. Here they are trying to raise their children in a world surrounded by threats, many of which liberals endorse. So you're raising your daughters, but all around you are messages about sex. Sex is art. Express yourself. Do what you want. This is Madonna and some person's lower part. I don't know who that is. But anyway, sex is art. Express yourself. If you want to slit your tongue, express yourself. It's your tongue. You can do what you want. If you want to take drugs, you're not hurting anyone else. It's your choice. It's your mind. It's your consciousness. If you want to burn the flag, hey, dissent is patriotic. Free speech. If you want to have an abortion, go ahead. It's your body. It's your choice. Don't let anyone else tell you what to do. If you want to end your life early, call Dr. Kevorkian. And if you want to spice up your sex life, go to divineinterventions.com, where for $30 you can buy the Baby Jesus butt plug. If you want the glow-in-the-dark color, that's $31. Sacrilege, in a true foundational morality, there's no such thing as sacrilege. Nothing is sacred. And so sacrilege is fun. It's subversive, and subversive is good. Subversive is high praise in liberal circles because you're subverting older power structures. Okay, until the Democrats can understand this point of view, until the Democrats can understand that there can be such a thing as too much freedom, they are vulnerable to attack. So, in conclusion, I'd like to stress these three sort of take-home points. The first is just a summary of what I've been saying, that liberals construct their morality. Morality is a social construction, but it's constructed on variable foundations. For liberals, there are just two. For most people, and certainly for conservatives, there are five. For most cultures around the world and throughout history, the five foundational morality is normal. And this is absolutely crucial for coming up with an alternative to Bush's misguided war on terror. If you look at the Quran, people should read the Quran. Very few people do. The Quran is the most eloquent statement of a five foundational morality. It covers all five. It's very much about purity, authority, in-group, all five. And if you look at the letters of bin Laden, which are written by committee, many of them, but the point is that the moral appeals that Al-Qaeda is making are five foundational appeals. We're not going to win over hearts and minds of Arabs and Muslims by lecturing them about harm and fairness and how wrong it is to kill innocent people. That's just not going to get us anywhere. And my final point is that liberals need to take seriously all the rhetoric about diversity and how terrible it is when you don't have diversity. Well, guess what? Many of you in this room come from academic or creative worlds. And as I can tell you from being an academic, at conferences I raise my hand. This is, you know what? This is the most conservative group I've ever addressed because there were 7 people here who raised their hand for being conservative. That doesn't happen in most areas of academics. So because we isolate ourselves in these cloistered zones of zero moral diversity, we become morally colorblind. We lose the ability to see part of the moral spectrum, and that's dangerous. We cannot fully explain why most people actually did vote for Bush in 2004. It wasn't just trickery. We fall back on non-moral explanations. We want to comfort ourselves with ideas like, oh, well, people voted for Bush because Karl Rove is this evil genius, and he put something in the water and subliminal messages, and that's why he made people vote against their self-interest. But really, really people have our morality. They were just tricked. That's comforting nonsense. So my closing point, my closing comment, and my hopeful prediction is that by 2012, liberals will understand the 5 foundational morality. They'll understand why most people support some conservative ideas and policies, and they will at least then be able to hold on to whatever gains they might make in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's, you've left us with a fascinating taxonomy of morality, and the big surprise here is that it turns out that liberals have a much shallower, narrower conception of morality, and that conservatives have a conception with far greater amplitude. Let me sort of return to that. Mm-hmm. What do conservatives get right? What can we learn from them?
Well, first, I would never say that liberals have a shallower morality. People are very passionate about morality, and especially as you go out to the extremes. I would never say it's shallow. It's very heartfelt. It's powerful. It's a wonderful morality for living in a diverse society. But what I think the conservatives get right is that there are all these social traps, and we're learning about them in a lot of social science books these days, places where if we follow what we want to do, we end up doing something that isn't good for us. We don't even realize we're doing it. As society gets more and more modern, more and more free, the depression rate goes up, and people feel lost. And so when I was in India, I stopped into kind of an ashram place, and I wanted to interview the people there. And they just instantly coded me as, another of these young Westerners, completely lost, looking for meaning, comes to India, thinks he'll find meaning. So I think we sort of we kind of burn up a lot of the social structure, even limits that it's beneficial to transcend.
Well, are you telling me that conservatives are happier than liberals?
They are, in fact. If you simply measure how happy people are, and people have been doing this for decades. Gallup has data going back to the 40s or 50s. Right. You might think, well, of course conservatives are happier now because Bush is in the White House, but it doesn't really matter. That's one of the big surprises. It doesn't really matter who's in the White House. Conservatives are happier people. Religious people are happier. And a big part of the explanation for this is that both conservatives and religious people participate in denser, more binding structures. We think we want freedom, but if you get freedom beyond a certain point, it's actually bad for you.
In terms of the political structures that you talked about, people talking past each other, the possibility of engaging a larger public, and as you say, it's a quite conservative country overall. Which are the candidates who have it right? Which are the candidates who have that vocabulary?
Of the three major ones, of Clinton, Edwards, and Obama, I was just looking on their websites a few days ago, and I mean, Hillary Clinton has made some moves in that direction. She's tried to position herself, but it's kind of obvious that she's trying to position herself. Edwards, I think, is so eloquent on this two-foundation morality. Edwards is a through-and-through progressive. He speaks beautifully, but if you want to get elected to the presidency, you can't do it by saying, elect me and I will help the poor. Presidential politics is about leadership and inspiration. And I saw a wonderful speech on Obama's webpage where he talks about the role of religion in American public life and in American morality. And he urges that liberals or Democrats need to get over the idea that somehow religion has to be kept out. Most people are very religious, as he says, or he quotes numbers that more Americans believe in angels than in evolution. But religion has played an important role in our history. And I think the real point about Obama is that he makes space for people to be religious and not be bad or wrong. That is, we don't have to all agree on common ground. Ultimately, if we can just communicate non-contempt for religious people, if Democrats can at least open up space for it and say, that's okay, that's good. So I think Obama is probably the best of the major candidates.
Now, a sort of pillar or an aspect of our, I guess, moral thinking that didn't come up earlier is the sense of awe or elevation. You talked about saints. We saw a picture of Mother Teresa and so on. And you just said that leadership is partly about inspiring people and rousing them to a sense of an ideal that they'd like to live up to.
That's right.
How does that fit into this?
I think the Democrats have spent way too long thinking that people will vote for the president who gives them the best policies. I think this is a terrible mistake. Many of you have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink. We make up our minds in an instant, in a few seconds or a few minutes. And so the Democrats keep nominating people like Kerry and Gore, who completely failed the Blink test. I mean, Bush didn't pass it with flying colors, but, Gore was even worse. And on that count, again, I think Hillary Clinton's gotten a lot better, but she doesn't have it naturally. She's not a natural. Edwards and Obama, I think, are both great. And part of their greatness is that they make us feel morally better. They lift us up when they speak. And it's a very unconscious response. I've been studying these emotions of awe and moral elevation. It's a very unconscious response. But it draws us to people. And throughout history, you have stories of people who heard the Buddha preach, they heard 6 words, and they gave up all their possessions and came to follow him. People still do this with Mother Teresa. Or not anymore, but they used to. So I think awe and elevation are crucial in political life. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew this, and we moderns have forgotten it.
And also seems an element in the appeal of certain really zealous forms of Islam and Islamism. You'd referred earlier to the fact that in your reading of the Quran and other texts, it seems a very densely 5-pillar, full-spectrum structure. What kind of advice does that give us, or what leads does it give us in terms of engaging with that?
Yeah. One thing I've learned in reading about politics is that political conservatism is hard. It's hard to describe political conservatism as a theory or ideology in general. Conservatism is a positional ideology. It arises as a reaction to the extremes of liberalism, certainly in the French Revolution. What we can learn from Islam, I mean, it's very painful. It's hard to listen, especially if, after the 9/11 attack, it's almost impossible to listen or to learn something. But the critique that many Islamic thinkers make of the West, of our moral decay, is in many ways the same as the critique that the religious right makes. Moral decay. What does that mean? Well, we instantly come back with, moral decay? We're going to listen to you, you terrorists or you abortion clinic bombers. But that slide I showed with all the disturbing images, if you can sort of get out of your sort of culture war mindset and at least see that there's a critique of modern Western society that shows that it's really crass and degraded. I think that's an important critique. And when we give ourselves over to the market and basically say anyone can sell anything they want, do anything they want, choose anything they want, we gain freedom, but we lose a certain kind of human dignity.
How important are ideas or theories in the judgments that we arrive at. You've written about what you call moral dumbfounding, and I wonder if you could say a bit about that.
So when I started my research in graduate school, I thought that, well, morality is, we reason about things and we feel things, and sometimes these go head to head. And I did a lot of experiments trying to manipulate reasoning and manipulate intuition. And I was never able to change judgments by manipulating reasoning, by enhancing or slowing down people's reasoning. I finally realized that what's going on, I believe, is that moral judgment is really just like aesthetic judgment. That is, you see something, you see a painting, you see a person, and you have an instant reaction. You cannot stop yourself from having an instant reaction. And then you think, well, why is she beautiful? Why is that beautiful? You can come up with reasons, but those aren't the reasons necessarily that led you to the judgment. And what I found is that morality is the same. So we all have these quick gut feelings. Then we are so good at reasoning, but we don't reason in order to find the truth. Moral reasoning developed, I believe, to help us persuade others to come over to our side. Moral reasoning is done strategically. And this is really important for the political process, because when you get people together to talk, well, if we all agree, then we just give each other better and better arguments. And when people disagree, it turns out if you bring people together to just talk about the issues, they jump into this confrontational mindset. They're playing defense against the other people's arguments, and they end up even more polarized than they were before. The way in, I think, is not through reason. The way in is through interpersonal human understanding, through emotions, through humanizing. So if you can, and this is, I think, is the great strength of liberals. Liberals are better, I believe, at looking at multiple perspectives, taking other people's perspectives. So if you can at least humanize your opponents, suddenly you're now open to their arguments in a way that you weren't when it was all done on the rational level.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the examples, some of the anecdotes that you've tried with people that elicit maybe clashing results? Or
Sure. So I began my research by looking at harmless taboo violations. These are stories about an adult brother and sister who are traveling on vacation in France. They decide it would be interesting and fun if they tried making love. They use 2 forms of birth control. They keep it as a special secret between them. They never do it again. What do you think? Is this okay? And students at the University of Virginia say, no, it's not okay. Well, why not? Well, because the kids will be deformed in science. They make up the reasons, but then they say, no, there's no chance of a kid in this case. So now would you say it's okay? And nobody says, oh, yeah, if there's no chance of kids, then sure, it's okay. Nobody says that. They say, you can get them to a point where they say, gosh, this is hard. I know it's wrong, but I'm just having trouble thinking about it, but I know it's wrong. So this is at least an example. And you can do this in so many issues where you know what's right and wrong, and the reasoning is post hoc.
When it comes to the sort of larger debates that are increasingly, the kind of hot-button issues that people decide on, how would you move people? If people, a national campaign, the stuff that Thomas Frank writes about in What's the Matter with Kansas.
Right.
Hot-button issues like abortion, like a prayer in schools, flag burning, and so on.
Yeah. I think you can't do it with arguments. I think the source matters more than the argument. So if somebody, if somebody with credibility on either side, this is true for both sides, if somebody with credibility on both sides were to step forward and say, it's very important to start by reassuring your own supporters of what you believe. So you come forward and say, well, look, I'm pro-choice. It's crucial that women have a right to choose. Look what happened before. So you sort of reassure your own supporters of that. But then you say, but you know what? As the fetus goes on in life, it does become closer and closer to becoming a baby. So that if an abortion occurs in the 6th month, it's not zero. It's not that nothing bad has happened. Something bad has happened, increasingly bad. So somebody who can at least start you by agreeing with them, and then get to the point where you say, you know what? Some restrictions on abortion might actually be the humane, normal, rational, morally right thing to do. So in all these cases, the solution is going to be nuanced, but we end up, particularly on abortion, just retreating to battle lines and not being willing to give an inch.
I mean, one thing that strikes me when I read some of the political strategy offered by George Lakoff and others is, the mommy party and the daddy party, and this is how Democrats need to use certain words and reposition themselves. It's a guidebook for manipulation.
That's right.
To what extent are you really saying, no, there is something to be learned?
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. So George Lakoff's idea about Democrats have a nurturant parent model of the family and then of the nation, conservatives have a strict father model of the family and then of the nation. I think that's all exactly right as a description. But I think Lakoff believes, and I agree with Lakoff, he's done a brilliant job of analyzing the language, but he thinks that if the Democrats can just get the language right, they'll activate the buttons deep down and then shift people over to the progressive side. I think that's wrong. I think that you have to not just understand them in order to manipulate them. I think you have to end up with a kind of a nuanced position that says, whenever lots of smart people believe something, let's open-mindedly try to see what they're right about. And guess what? They almost always are right about something. So I think the five foundational view is from a straight social science point of view. I'm an atheist. I don't believe we have some moral obligation to something out there in the universe. But just from a straight social science perspective, what kind of world, what kind of country is best for the people in this country or the world? I think that it's important to recognize that you need this sort of the yin-yang. Actually, I have a final slide. I thought maybe it would come to this. There's as many people know, in Hinduism, there are a lot of different gods. Let's see, I wonder if they've taken, there we are. All right, so many people know that in Hinduism there are many gods, but two of the most well-known are Shiva, the destroyer, and Vishnu, the preserver. But this is not like they're enemies, like, they're battling it out and they hate each other. Not at all. This is like yin-yang. This is like the change of the seasons. And as I said, conservatism is a positional ideology. Liberalism tends to go too far. Like any group of people with no diversity, they're going to just go and go and go off to the extreme. We need a basically liberal framework for a modern diverse democracy. That's America. We're diverse. We're always going to be. So I think liberalism, historically speaking, Enlightenment liberalism, is the right overall framework. But it needs to be leavened by an appreciation of what conservatives are right about. So the conservative critique, I think, can really make this a better country. Not that I want it to be 50-50. So I want, I guess, 80-20 yin-yang. But we need that, we need that leavening. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you.